Agent Ryan Chase was no stranger to danger. Years of undercover work for a shadowed government agency had shaped him into a hardened operative with one unbreakable rule: complete the mission. Yet, something about this assignment, deep in the belly of a covert research facility, gnawed at him. The intel was sparse, only hinting at an experimental weapon that had been stolen from another classified lab. But Ryan knew enough to recognize when he was being used, set up as a pawn in a game he couldn't see. The facility was a labyrinth of cold steel corridors and dim lighting. Ryan's steps echoed off the walls, swallowed by the distant hum of machines. Every corner held a whisper of danger. He could feel it, his instincts buzzing like a live wire. Then, a sharp crack split the silence, followed by a tremor that rattled the walls. An explosion erupted from a lab down the corridor, a bloom of light so bright it seemed to tear through the metal walls. Ryan threw himself back, arms shielding his face, but he was too close. The force of the blast slammed him against the wall, knocking the breath from his lungs. Stars danced across his vision as he struggled to his feet, his ears ringing. Smoke thickened in the air, carrying the scent of scorched metal and a strange, almost electric tang that made his skin tingle. As the dust settled, Ryan looked down at his hands and noticed the faintest shimmer surrounding them. A flicker of light danced between his fingers, weaving in and out of his skin like living electricity. He flexed his hand, and the light pulsed in response. Unnerved, he tried to shake it off, but it only grew stronger, wrapping around his fingers like a second skin. He didn't have time to process what had happened. The mission called for him to escape before the facility's automated defenses kicked in, but as he moved, his body felt different, lighter, faster. Every step was effortless, as if he were gliding rather than running. The corridors blurred around him, and when he finally burst into the cool night air, he felt a surge of energy within him, a power unlike anything he'd ever known. In the days that followed, Ryan grappled with the discovery that he could manipulate light. It wasn't just a trick of the eyes or an aftereffect of the explosion. No, this power was real. He could bend light to his will, create illusions, even fade into invisibility. The possibilities thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. For weeks, he tested his new abilities in secret, sneaking into abandoned warehouses and deserted alleyways, experimenting with what he could do. He learned to shape light into dazzling flashes, blinding any would-be attackers in an instant. He could cloak himself, blending into his surroundings so seamlessly that even a trained agent would struggle to spot him. And, in time, he discovered he could project holograms, illusions so real they could fool the sharpest minds. But as he honed his powers, Ryan began to see the world around him differently. The agency he'd served for years no longer felt like a sanctuary of justice, but rather a machine churning out agents, each more expendable than the last. The missions he'd once accepted without question began to feel tainted, and the lines between right and wrong grew increasingly blurred. One night, while watching the city from a rooftop, he realized he couldn't simply go back to being an agent. This power demanded something more from him. He could be a force of change, an avenger who operated outside the agency's constraints. He took on the codename Dawn and set out to use his abilities for justice on his own terms. Soon, tales of the mysterious figure swept through the city. Criminals whispered about a shadow that struck without warning, a being who could vanish in the blink of an eye and wield light like a weapon. The press latched onto the story, dubbing him the Vigilante Dawn. Ryan relished the anonymity, the freedom to act without the agency's restrictions, even as he knew it made him a target. One night, during an intel-gathering operation, Ryan stumbled upon something far darker than petty crime. He'd been tracking a string of weapons deals when he intercepted a coded message about an organization known only as the Eclipse Network. Intrigued, he dug deeper, and what he found chilled him to the core. Eclipse was no ordinary criminal syndicate. It was a rogue faction with access to the same light manipulation technology he possessed. But unlike Ryan, they had twisted it, using it to sow terror and control. The leader of Eclipse was a man named Dr. Adrian Wolf, a former government scientist who disappeared years ago. Wolf's name was shrouded in infamy, a genius in light technology, rumored to have dabbled in morally questionable experiments. The files Ryan uncovered painted Wolf as a man obsessed with power, willing to use any means necessary to achieve his ends. Eclipse's plan was audacious and chilling. They aimed to stage a series of synchronized terrorist attacks in major cities across the globe. By manipulating light, they would create illusions so realistic that entire populations would be plunged into chaos, fearing invasions, natural disasters, and worse. Then, as governments scrambled to respond, Eclipse would strike, dismantling power structures and leaving the world ripe for their rule. Ryan felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. He couldn't ignore this, but neither could he simply hand the intel over to the agency. They'd betrayed him too many times, and he couldn't trust them not to weaponize his abilities if they learned of his secret. He knew he'd have to act alone, but the enormity of the task left him reeling. In his struggle, he reached out to the one person he believed he could trust, Agent Sarah Reed, his former partner. Sarah was sharp, resourceful, and, above all, had a moral compass that rarely wavered. He knew she suspected him of being the vigilante Dawn, but he'd kept her at arm's length, unsure if she'd understand his motives. Now, he had no choice but to bring her into the fold. Meeting Sarah in a secluded alley, he finally revealed his secret, showing her the light manipulation powers that had become his burden and his weapon. Her reaction was a mixture of awe and shock, tempered by a fierce determination. "Ryan," she whispered, eyes wide as he demonstrated a blinding flash that lit the alley like daylight. "Do you realize what you're capable of?" "I do," he replied, a hint of weariness in his voice. "And that's why I need your help. Eclipse is planning something catastrophic, and I can't take them down alone." Together, they formed a plan, recruiting a third ally, Lucas Grayson, a tech genius with a knack for hacking into any system and a network of underground contacts that could track Eclipse's activities. With Lucas's help, they pinpointed key Eclipse operatives and began dismantling the organization from the inside, launching a series of calculated strikes. Each mission brought new challenges, as Wolf countered their moves with a precision that suggested he was always one step ahead. One night, as they prepared to raid an Eclipse stronghold, Ryan encountered Wolf's enforcer, a figure known only as Spectre. Unlike Ryan, Spectre's light manipulation abilities were twisted and dark, enabling him to create deadly, razor-sharp projections of light that cut through steel and flesh alike. Their first encounter was a brutal clash of powers, light against shadow, each man pushing his abilities to the limit. Spectre fought with a ruthless efficiency, taunting Ryan with claims that he was just another government weapon, a pawn in a game he'd never understand. The words stung, echoing Ryan's own doubts, but he pushed through, determined to prove he was more than a tool. As the days passed, Eclipse's plan began to unfold. They unleashed their illusions in several cities, plunging them into chaos. Ryan and his team scrambled to intercept, barely managing to keep the attacks contained. It became clear that they were fighting a losing battle. Eclipse was too vast, too well coordinated. Desperation clawed at Ryan, and he found himself questioning his choice to operate outside the agency's support, but Sarah reminded him why he'd chosen this path, her steady gaze grounding him when his doubts threatened to consume him. "You're doing this because it's right, Ryan," she said. "Not because it's easy." Fueled by her words, Ryan devised a final plan. They would confront Wolf head-on, in a strike designed to dismantle Eclipse's core and sever the organization's power. It was a long shot, a risky gamble that could cost them their lives, but Ryan knew they had no other option. As the plan came together, Ryan could feel the tension building in every fiber of his body. He, Sarah, and Lucas had mapped out every detail, pinpointing the central hub of the Eclipse network, a fortified complex hidden in an abandoned industrial district on the city's edge. The team knew that Wolf would be there, and they understood that this confrontation would be different from anything they'd faced. They weren't just trying to stop another attack, they were going up against a man who wielded powers equal to Ryan's, a man with no scruples and an army at his command. They arrived under the cover of night, blending into the shadows that clung to the buildings. Ryan's light manipulation allowed him to cast a near-invisibility cloak over the team, moving them closer to their target without triggering any alarms. Lucas had hacked into the facility's surveillance system, blinding their cameras for a brief window, but they knew they'd only have moments before Eclipse realized something was amiss. The complex loomed ahead, its walls lined with armed guards, all equipped with advanced weaponry. Ryan scanned the scene, taking in every detail. "Lucas, keep us connected. I want a constant feed on those guard positions," he murmured into his comm. Lucas's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Got it. You've got a gap on the eastern side. Move now." Ryan led the team forward, slipping past the guards and into the facility's inner perimeter. They moved with precision, each of them playing their part flawlessly, as though they'd been trained together for years. Sarah was at his side, her steady presence grounding him, while Lucas navigated them through the building's labyrinthine corridors from his remote setup. As they approached the central command room, Ryan felt a chill settle over him. Something wasn't right. The air was thick, charged with an oppressive energy that seemed to pulse through the walls. He gestured for the others to stop, pressing a hand to his earpiece. "Lucas, are you picking up anything unusual on the sensors?" he whispered. A pause, then Lucas's voice, laced with tension. "I'm getting weird readings. High energy levels, but I can't pinpoint the source. Whatever it is, it's big." Ryan exchanged a glance with Sarah. They both knew what that meant. Wolf was nearby, and he wasn't alone. They pressed on, nerves taut, each step carrying them closer to the confrontation they'd been dreading. Finally, they reached the command room, its door standing ominously ajar. Ryan took a deep breath, steeling himself, and signaled for Sarah to cover him. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Wolf was waiting, a smug smile curving his lips. The room was bathed in an eerie, cold light that cast twisted shadows across the walls. Beside him stood Spectre, his face unreadable, his posture poised like a predator ready to strike. "Agent Chase," Wolf greeted, his tone dripping with mockery. "Or should I say, Dawn. Quite the upgrade, don't you think?" Ryan clenched his fists, the familiar hum of his power flickering to life beneath his skin. "It's over, Wolf. We're shutting this down, and you're coming with us." Wolf laughed, a low, chilling sound that echoed through the room. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I didn't come all this way to be stopped by a government lapdog with a hero complex." His gaze shifted to Spectre, who nodded, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. Before Ryan could react, Spectre lunged, his movements a blur as he closed the distance between them. Ryan barely had time to raise his hands, generating a shield of blinding light to deflect Spectre's first strike. The room exploded in a flurry of light and shadow, the two men locked in a deadly dance as their powers clashed. Spectre's abilities were unlike anything Ryan had encountered. Where Ryan's light was pure and radiant, Spectre's was dark, twisted, forged into razor-sharp projections that cut through the air like blades. Each strike forced Ryan to retreat, his defenses barely holding against the relentless assault. Sarah fired her weapon, aiming for Wolf, but the scientist moved with surprising agility, dodging her shots with ease. He gestured, and the lights in the room flickered, then dimmed, casting everything in a deep, unnatural darkness. Ryan's vision swam as he struggled to keep track of Spectre's movements, the shadows playing tricks on his eyes. "Is this all you've got, Chase?" Spectre taunted, his voice a whisper in the darkness. "I expected more from the infamous Dawn." Ryan gritted his teeth, pushing back the exhaustion that clawed at him. He knew he couldn't win this fight by playing defense. Taking a deep breath, he focused, gathering every ounce of energy he could muster. His skin glowed brighter, illuminating the room with a fierce, unyielding light that forced Spectre to shield his eyes. With a surge of adrenaline, Ryan struck, sending a blinding beam of light directly at Spectre. The man stumbled back, momentarily disoriented, and Ryan took the opportunity to close the distance, landing a solid punch to his jaw. Spectre fell, hitting the ground with a grunt, but even as he lay there, a smirk twisted his lips. "Impressive, Chase," he sneered, wiping a trickle of blood from his mouth. "But you'll have to do better than that." Spectre rose, his form seeming to dissolve into the shadows, only to reappear on the other side of the room. Ryan barely had time to react as Spectre launched another assault, his shadowy blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. Ryan dodged, but one of the blades grazed his arm, leaving a searing pain in its wake. Desperation clawed at him as he realized he was losing ground. He couldn't keep up with Spectre's relentless attacks, couldn't match the raw, twisted power that radiated from him. But as he struggled, a thought flickered through his mind, a memory of Lucas's words, of the high-energy readings they detected earlier. Wolf had to be drawing power from somewhere, feeding Spectre's abilities with an external source. If he could find it, disrupt it, he might have a chance. With a quick glance at Sarah, he signaled her to cover him. She nodded, her expression fierce, and opened fire, creating a distraction that allowed Ryan to slip past Spectre and dart toward the far end of the room, where a massive generator hummed with energy. The machinery pulsed, the faint glow of light emanating from its core, a sickly, unnatural shade that set his teeth on edge. Ryan reached out, his fingers brushing the generator's surface, and he felt a surge of energy pulse through him. It was like touching raw power, an electric current that burned through his veins, threatening to consume him. But he held on, focusing, drawing the light into himself and redirecting it, forcing it to bend to his will. A burst of energy exploded from the generator, engulfing the room in blinding light. Spectre screamed, the shadows around him dissolving as the light burned through them, stripping him of his power. Wolf stumbled back, shielding his eyes, his smug composure crumbling as he realized he was losing control. Ryan seized the moment, channeling the last of his strength into a final, blinding attack. He directed the light toward Wolf, enveloping him in a radiant glow that left no room for shadows, no space for escape. Wolf fell to his knees, his face twisted in fear and rage as the light consumed him, rendering him powerless. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan stood there, breathing heavily, the glow of his power dimming as exhaustion set in. Sarah moved to his side, her hand resting on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the battle they'd fought and won. Lucas's voice crackled over the comm. Is it over?" Ryan nodded, though he knew Lucas couldn't see him. "Yeah. It's over." As they made their way out of the facility, the weight of everything they'd endured settled over Ryan. He'd faced his darkest fears, confronted the shadows that had haunted him, and emerged victorious. But he knew this wasn't the end of his journey. In the days that followed, as he and Sarah dismantled the remnants of the Eclipse network, he realized that his path was clear. He couldn't go back to the agency, couldn't return to the life he'd once known. The power he wielded came with a responsibility, a duty to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and so, he became Dawn, a guardian who walked the line between light and shadow, fighting for justice in a world that desperately needed it. His past no longer defined him, he had chosen his own path, a path forged in the light of a new dawn.